Welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin, where we unpack the strategies and solutions that make localization fast, scalable, and efficient. I'm your host, Stefan Huyghe. Good morning from Texas and good afternoon in Estonia. We're here with Dave Edwards, who is the head of internationalization at Pipedrive. And it's not every day I get to meet somebody that does 2 million words in 22 languages a year. That's some street cred there, Dave. Good morning from Texas and welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself real quick to the audience so we know why you're here?
Hello, Stefan. Hello, everyone. My name's David. I'm originally from the UK, from England. But I've been living in Estonia for the last 8 years, and I've been working here at Pipedrive, initially as a localization manager, and then team lead, and then head of the department as it grew. And I've been doing that job for the last 7 years or so. My background is not in linguistics or translation, so to speak. I did a PhD at the University of Glasgow. It was about nation branding and national identity and this kind of thing. But when you kind of study or work in that sphere, you have to have like an aptitude for languages. And then when I got here to Tallinn, Estonia, I found that people weren't so much interested in that kind of stuff. They were interested in more the fact that I could speak 5 languages. And I ended up working in software, even though I'd never coded a day in my life. I'd never used this specific software. I was kind of invited to apply for the role. And yeah, it turned up. I didn't know what Pipedrive did. It turns out it's a kind of sales CRM tool. It's for sales teams and people who are selling products or, they have their own sales processes, and it helps them manage their processes better. I'd never done any of that. I'd never worked in a localization team. I'd done translation before. And we kind of figured it out on the fly so that we had some kind of foundations. And since then, we've kind of expanded it step by step as the company's grown. This 2 million words, well, it feels like a lot sometimes. And then we look at some other companies and the amount of output that they've got, and then we feel like little tiny fish.
It's some serious street cred as far as I'm concerned. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to you today is that you have a lot of experience with continuous localization and managing dynamic content on the fly, I've been told. So that's kind of the way you guys do business, right? You have a continuous stream of content that needs to be localized.
Exactly. So it's a case of figuring out scalability and how to scale your content production up. To do that, you need to work with automations. You need to make sure your teams are kind of autonomous. And you need to work within a continuous localization framework because our company is making many, many deploys every day. The development teams work quite decentralized. And so we had to figure out scalability. And then we've ended up in a situation where we've got 3 product managers managing 24 languages now. And 2.7 million, I think, was the last count that I made.
It's gone up.
It always goes up, Stefan, believe me. More and more content to translate, never less.
What are the most challenging languages for you? Were there different levels of complexity as far as languages are concerned?
For us, I don't think there are levels of complexity. I think we have a very good or trusted LSP that we work with, and they're very good at finding translators and editor teams for us for all of the languages. I'd say agglutinative languages, things like Estonian, Finnish, Turkish, these are quite tricky where you're adding endings onto the end of words. And so the form of the source text and the form of the output text is going to be completely different. There you need to be very, very flexible. And sometimes developers don't quite understand the flexibility required, especially when it comes to, embedding links in things and, also in Japanese and Korean and these kind of languages with characters instead of words. These are also pretty tricky when you have to manage the word order and links and variables and all of this kind of stuff. But this is what we find fun. This is why we come to work with a smile on our face, everyone who's solving problems.
So Doing localization this frequently is probably a little bit different than the traditional file exchange translation process that you got started with, I assume, as a translator originally. How do frequent updates and things like that change the complexity of your workflow, and what strategies do you employ to help your teams manage that dynamic content efficiently?
It's a really big difference, actually, and it's quite daunting when you first start working in an environment where you're deploying so regularly, and there are so many different sources of translations coming. When I first started, I was working on, I don't know, book translations and article translations, where you would get a finished version and you would translate it in a doc and you would send it back, and that was it, job done. In this context, in Pipedrive context, we've got 11 different tribes, and each of those tribes are kind of working on different missions or projects or tasks. So we could have kind of 45 simultaneous pieces of work, all potentially with translations coming towards us. So you can't spend time collecting strings manually. You can't wait to send things out and get them back. You have to be working constantly with this constant stream of strings going out for translation and strings coming back that are translated and then need to be implemented in the code base. And the only way to kind of achieve that kind of scalability is with some kind of software, like a translation management platform or something in the middle, which is kind of directing all of that different traffic in. But it is really daunting, and it's quite hard to kind of get your head around it if you've not been in that environment. So we had a consultant come, and they'd been working in computer games localization, and we kind of explained the system to them, and they kind of stepped back. This is chaos. Like, what you need to do is tell your developers to stop deploying so regularly. And we were like, well, we've got 400 developers in the company. I can't tell all of them to stop just because our team of 2 localization project managers can't keep up. So the challenge was for us to keep up with the speed that the company is going at. And there are ways that you can do it, but if you're not used to it, then it can be very, very intimidating and very daunting.
It seems like the ideal situation for a software like Crowdin to be put in the middle. You already touched on that a little bit. How does that really benefit you in your specific case? What's that setup like? I'd love to know.
I don't think it's possible to kind of achieve the scalability that we've achieved, or in any kind of continuous localization context, without something like Crowdin. So for us, Crowdin serves the purpose of this kind of single source of truth. So we know that the live translations that are visible on our product, they're in Crowdin. And if you want to make a change or update something or translate something new, you have to go to Crowdin in order to do that. That's the central hub. And without that kind of accessible platform that everyone is working in simultaneously and can see, then it does become chaos. But if you have somewhere where things are organized, where everyone knows their role and knows how to operate the system, trusts each other to work autonomously within that system or that platform, then you can start to achieve the kind of scalability that we need. Without Crowdin, I think it's not possible. We bought a company a couple of years ago, and we had a look at their localization process, and it was kind of locked behind closed doors. You couldn't access it. The translators weren't working directly in there. The localization project managers had to manually input their strings. And we took one look at it. We said, this isn't scalable. Like, this doesn't work with the volume of content that we're going to be kicking out on a weekly or monthly or even daily basis. So in this case, building your own system or working manually with Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets or Docs or something, it simply doesn't work. You need that kind of hub where everyone is working together, everything is visible, everyone can see what everyone else is doing. That single source of truth, it's really kind of crucial to build a process with the kind of output that we need.
Let's talk about integrating localization with your development pipelines a little bit, because I'm interested in the controlled chaos that you were describing.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like controlled chaos, believe me.
Do you have any tips for localization teams to work more effectively with their developers, since That seems to be your main bottleneck, working with 400 developers, you just said. That's got to be daunting.
Every time you introduce a touch point or a gateway or a communication point in your process, you're going to be generating friction. And the more friction you generate, the more things break down. There might be problems. There might be elements which cause a problem. So in our experience, the best way is to build automations that work autonomously so that developers can concentrate on developing and they don't need to spend their time worrying about creating tickets or talking to a localization team, because once they start doing that, they start forgetting to do that, and then your localization project managers are chasing around, and this is all kind of eating into your ability to scale and work through content quickly and efficiently. So our integrations and our automation, it's all hooked into the merge/deploy function so that whenever a developer is working on some code or a branch of the main code base, whenever they merge their code into the main code base or they make a deploy, for example, the synchronization between the code base and Crowdin happens automatically. And by doing that, you have a high degree of trust that what you see in Crowdin reflects accurately the current state of your product or your software. It seems quite like a, not crude, but quite a basic integration, but creating that like really high fidelity link between the translation management platform and your software product, it's kind of crucial to getting it work. But this all hinges on making sure that your developers know the system, that they know this very basic step, which is when I write content that's visible to customers, or when I write some kind of string that needs to be translated, it must be tagged in a certain way. And then everything else will happen in the background. And they don't need to create a ticket. A ticket will already be created automatically. They don't need to worry about right-clicking and sending to a translation management platform. They don't need to worry about writing to localization project managers, nothing like this. You really need to remove those friction points and look at the life and the processes of the developer team and say, okay, how can I slip an automation or a synchronization in here without them noticing, without them having to do anything manual, that will make sure that we as the localization team can see exactly what they're working on and work on things when they're ready to be worked on. It's all about that, finding that point, that pain point where you can insert that automation. And for us, it's merge/deploy. It works okay. This is the way we've been working, I think, for 10, 12 years now. So it seems to be the correct automation point, I would say.
It's amazing. You talked a little bit about integrations, and I want to dig a bit deeper into that because Crowdin has over 600 integrations right now. What are some of the most prevalent ones that are best used to you for real-time updates in a multilingual environment?
We really like the Figma integration. This one is especially useful for us. We use that, for example, when giving screenshots or context to the translator teams. When you're working with such high volumes of content and also such rapid deployment, and so that your backlog fills up, you can't spend a lot of time tracking down designers or product managers or developers themselves and asking for screenshots. So having the Figma integration is very, very useful. Our team can just look at what's in the backlog, what's ready to be translated, go into Figma, find the designs, send them across, and then we can go from there. So this Figma integration is excellent for us. We're aware that there is also a GitHub integration with Crowdin. We don't use that one, but it's also very, very interesting to us. I think that we automated our systems before that integration was built. So we don't necessarily use it, but if we were to start from scratch today, I think this would be super, super important for us, just because then you can create these branches and then merge the branches. This kind of stuff would, I think, be an even better step than what we've currently got. I mean, what we have is great. It works fine for us. But if we were to build it from scratch, then being able to mirror the way that the developers work in that way would be, I think, invaluable. We also have the Gainsight is a tool that we use. I think this was even built by the Gainsight team. So having these third-party products building their own integrations with Crowdin is excellent, because when we were picking the tool to run kind of customer communications and in-app experimentation, then that was a really big plus for us that they had an integration with Crowdin. And suddenly we say, oh, well, now we can integrate it and do this multilingually, but with the same kind of scalability that we were expecting. So that was also a really, really, really useful one for us. So I think those are the three that we use most, or that we see as being the most valuable for us.
It's nice, I think, to have the kind of flexibility. If you have something built in your system already from before, you don't have to upend everything just to be able to work with Crowdin. But if you haven't, then you can integrate it from scratch and facilitate your workflow that way. What challenges you have, or how do you best ensure the quality of localization when you're at this breakneck real-time speed? I want to dig into that a little bit and hear from you what your mechanisms are to monitor quality.
I think the first step is making sure that everyone is well trained on the system and understands what their role is. And that's a very important role that my localization project managers have. It's not necessarily something that's using their linguistic training or their language skills, but they need to go out, engage with the translators and also with the developers to make sure that everyone is absolutely clear on what they're doing, because otherwise it's not controlled chaos, it's just chaos. Everyone's just doing whatever they like. So number one, you need to make sure that you've defined everyone's roles, processes, responsibilities, and that everyone kind of understands where they are. And from there, then you can start to introduce layers of quality control. So number one, we make sure that our localization product managers are looking through the backlog to make sure that we're catching strings before they reach the translator team. For example, there may be misdeploys, there may be strings that aren't ready. You'd be surprised at the number of times we catch things like hello world, and this is a test in our active translation backlog. And making sure that your localization project managers are catching those is really, really important.
And that's a human intervention activity. Then somebody goes through those text strings and reviews whether there's not some gobbledygook somewhere in there.
Exactly. Again, if you're creating an efficient system, then your localization project managers should have the time to be able to go through that. And if not, we can always trust our translators to flag it and say, are you sure this is ready for translation? It doesn't look ready to me. And then we can go back and have a look. Making sure the screenshots and context is attached to strings. This is also very, very important. We work with this kind of rolling backlog. So we have like a long list of strings, which the translators are just working down. And that means that they can be working on two very different products or features from one moment to the next. So 1 second, they might be working on our organization view or some kind of activities view. And then the next minute, they're looking at email sync or settings page or something like this. So they need to be able to switch, making sure that your localization project managers are adding screenshots regularly is super, super important, so that the translators know what it is that they're looking at. Otherwise, it can be quite easy to get lost or overwhelmed. And then beyond that, we always make sure that we have a 2-person team working on strings. So we have the translator working, the translator suggests their translation, but that translation doesn't become live until the editor has gone in, checked it, and approved it. This is also really, really important for us. We had a situation many, many years ago before we implemented this where we had no oversight about what was going on, what we were deploying. We had no idea what the quality was like. And now that we have that 2-step process, we have a much greater level of trust that what we're producing is good quality and that our customers are going to understand. And then finally, we do this regular external QA, where we take a third-party provider, different LSP, and tell them, okay, we want you to audit our email sync or our insights dashboards page or something like this. So we're always making sure that we're doing these random checks just to make sure that everything is okay. Over time, as people get used to this system, like I say, in the beginning, it's quite daunting, but as they get used to it, they get better at it. You can trust that the level and the quality of localization is getting better. Your QA is throwing up fewer and fewer and fewer errors. And then you can start to kind of release the guardrails and say, we only need to check this once per year rather than once per quarter now. So definitely you need guardrails there. You need to quality check. You need to be always mindful that errors can creep in. But I think as long as everyone knows what their role is within this kind of chaos, it seems to work. And the quality does improve over time.
Is there any risk of over automating things in the workflow?
If you over automate, there are quite a lot of risks to this. And they're like, the risks come from all different places. So one, for example, which you can already foresee is waste. So if you're letting kind of poor quality strings or strings that are not ready reach the translator, and the translator can't immediately pick out that this string is not ready for translation, you could end up paying 2, maybe even 3 times for the same translation. As the kind of developer redeploys it and fixes it, you can see the same string reappearing several times. So there's definitely an element of waste in there. I think there is the way that we used to work, we're much better at this now, but there is always a risk of cost overrun. Crowdin actually is very, very good at giving us an overview of our ongoing costs. So we can monitor how much we've spent, how much budget we have left, and then how much we have left to translate for the month. And if you're not monitoring that, then I think there is a risk that you can completely blow your budget and end up having a very tricky conversation with your finance team at the end of the month. So cost overrun, I think, is a really, really key one. One of the other things that we noticed as well was a problem, I don't know how you best describe it, invisibility. So as you kind of withdraw your localization team from this kind of manual work of running backwards and forwards with tickets from developers to translators and back, people can start to forget that they exist and that they're there. So we did a presentation, this was many, many years ago now, in front of the company. We explained what we did and what our role was and how we could help. And you'd be shocked at the amount of developers who came up to us afterwards and said, well, we had no idea anyone was working on this. We just thought it was magic, that it was taking care of itself somehow. And that kind of invisibility is great. It shows that you've kind of reduced the friction in the process. But at the same time, it's quite dangerous because people no longer know who to turn to if something breaks, or they become complacent. They think that this kind of thing doesn't need care or attention. And particularly, we've seen sometimes execs can kind of assume that you've become architects of your own redundancy, and they say, oh, well, what do we need you for if it's all running autonomously on its own? Where in actual fact, you're performing like a very, very, very important task as a localization project manager. It's just not immediately visible what it is. So this kind of invisibility, I think, is a really, really, really big risk. And we had to spend a lot of time working on this kind of T-shaped engagement to make sure that even though we weren't running backwards and forwards with tickets, or, we weren't rushed off of our feet managing these translations, that everyone kind of appreciated that the localization project managers were performing a really, really important function within that system.
And the localization director is always looking to demonstrate success and reaching of KPIs to the management team. How do you report that internally?
That became my role as it changed over time. As we became more autonomous and automated more, it was about managing visibility. I think that you, as a localization director, if you're in charge of a localization operation like this, you need to have visibility over your KPIs. We, in Pipedrive, make sure that we are plugged into the business performance in international markets. So we know on any given day how much revenue we make from any given market, whether that's a really big market like Brazil or Germany or something like that, or if it's a relatively smaller one like Estonia or Latvia, or it could be something where we don't really spend a lot of time or focus or attention, something like Indonesia, for example. You need to have a very, very clear idea about how your business is performing in those markets and regularly communicate on. And then you also need to kind of engage with the output and productivity and quality that your team are providing so that your execs, your managers have a very clear view that the operation that you're running may be functioning well and functioning autonomously, but it's also functioning in a quality way, that you're working on the right content, that you've got a good mix of not just product, but also marketing and SEO and knowledge-based content as well. So yeah, your role as an operations manager starts to change, and you're involved in communicating those kind of metrics out and generating those reports, and you become you're the guardian of the oversight of that system. Because without oversight, those risks that I just mentioned can get worse, but also the management can start to worry that no one's looking after this, or that maybe there is a bigger risk than there actually is, that you're not mitigating the problems.
All right. Well, we're almost at the end, and we've managed to speak a half an hour without even uttering the word AI, but I want to put a bow on this and touch upon it in parting, so to speak. How has AI changed your workflow and altered things in your localization world?
I have to be completely honest, we haven't integrated AI too deeply with our product localization. The reason why, we ran experiments to check how quality the output was, how good the output was, what were our cost and time savings, and we weren't super happy that the output or the outcome of that experiment was saving us something significantly over human translation. So although we have looked into it with our product localization, we haven't taken a further step in terms of integrating that. Now, that's definitely something which could change and probably will change in the future, because AI and machine translation tools are getting better. And we also know that using AI in different ways within the translation process also wins quality and speed and cost output. So it's a very exciting time actually to be involved in localization, because we've been using machine translation and neural machine translations for many, many, many years. So we're already kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to AI adoption. We already know where the risks are and where the opportunities are, but the quality is accelerating so fast, and now you can start to implement those. Where we do use AI is for what we call low jeopardy content. So this is content that is maybe not going to have a significant impact if there are minor errors or minor things which need to be tweaked or changed. So our knowledge base, for example, that's got about 2 million words in its archive. Our monthly output isn't so high, but it was prohibitively expensive to use a human translator to translate our knowledge base in all 24 of our languages. So what we did was we said, okay, what are our biggest languages with the most customers? Let's put a human on those. And then the smaller languages where we have fewer customers, we want to make sure that they have access to a localized knowledge base. We can't afford to put a human on it. Maybe if we use AI, that would be better than having no localized knowledge base at all. So now we have our knowledge base working autonomously for 19 languages. And, we gather feedback and we listen to customers who write to us and say, hey, this is inaccurate or whatever. But in general, I think that kind of approach works very well. And it allows us to, again, direct our focus onto things that we can have a bigger impact on, that will drive more value for the business, rather than working on these really technical texts that may not contribute massively to business growth. Now we can focus our resources on things like marketing text and making sure our product is as well localized as possible. But I think we're really, at Pipedrive, only scratching the surface of what's possible with AI and machine translation. I know that other companies are much more integrated with these systems, and I think there is a lot more potential to go. But we, at the moment, are quite very happy with the automations that we've built into our system. And I think it's exciting times to see how much further we can go with AI and where we can implement it.
David, it's been a fascinating half an hour. It's blown by. And I got the impression we should schedule a couple more sessions. So maybe we can have you on as a guest in the future again. Thank you so very much for sharing your agile localization knowledge. And thank you very much. I wish you a wonderful afternoon in Estonia. And I hope we run into one another at a conference one of these days and I can buy you a beer. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more about how leading companies are managing their multilingual content efficiently, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thank you for tuning in. For more resources on how to streamline your localization process, visit crowdin.com. See you next time.